My name is Patricia Monroe. I'm 69 years old, retired school secretary, widow, and mother of one. For 40 years, I typed other people's letters, balanced other people's ledgers, and stashed every spare dollar into one account with a single purpose: my retirement. When James, my husband, died 10 years ago, I promised myself I would never be a burden to anyone. Every paycheck, every bonus, every tax refund went into that fund. By the time I turned 69, it held $380,000, enough to keep me safe, keep me free, keep me from ever needing to beg my own son for rent. On a gray Tuesday morning, I logged in from the kitchen computer expecting to see the familiar 6 digits. Instead, what stared back nearly knocked me out of my chair. $14,327.11. I blinked, refreshed the page, same number. My hands shook as I scrolled through the transactions. Withdrawals, large gaping ones. $60,000 in January, $45,000 in March, another $80,000 in July. And each withdrawal bore the same authorization, a secondary signature: David Monroe, my son. I pushed back from the desk, heart pounding so loud it echoed in my ears. David had keys to my house, yes. He helped me carry groceries sometimes, but access to my retirement account, that was sacred. That was mine. I pulled the printed statements from the tray, ink still warm. Each page screamed betrayal. At the bottom of the latest statement was a note: investment partner, Claire Monroe, my daughter-in-law. The air in the kitchen turned thick. The coffee pot hissed. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. But inside my chest, something cracked open. I whispered aloud to no one but myself, "They've gutted me." That night, I sat at the dining table with the statements fanned before me like a deck of poison cards. James's photo hung on the wall, his grin frozen in time. I looked up at him and said, "They've taken everything we built." The hook was buried deep now. Not just missing money, not a clerical error. My own flesh and blood had stolen my future, and they thought I wouldn't notice. The next evening, I asked David and Claire to come by. I told them I was making pot roast, his favorite. The food was only bait. What I really had was a stack of bank statements waiting on the table. They walked in cheerful, Claire carrying a bottle of cheap wine like it excused everything. David kissed my cheek quickly, already reaching for his phone. "Sit," I said, sharper than I meant. My hand pressed the folder flat against the oak table. David frowned. "What's this, Mom?" I opened the folder, slid the top statement toward him. "You tell me." His eyes darted across the page, then flicked up to Claire. She shifted in her chair, chin high, as if daring me to press further. I didn't give them the chance to prepare a story. $380,000. I built it dollar by dollar for 40 years. And now, less than 15 remains. Withdrawn under your signature, David. He cleared his throat, tried for casual. "Mom, relax. It's family money. I only moved it to a better investment. We'll double it, you'll see." "Investment?" My voice cracked. "I never authorized a cent." Claire leaned forward, glossy nails tapping the table. "Patricia, with all respect, you don't need that much. At your age, it's selfish to sit on it while others struggle. We put it to work. For David, for Sophie's future, for the family." The word selfish stung sharper than any slap. I looked at my son. "You forged my name." David held up both hands. "Mom, I didn't forge anything. You gave me access years ago. Remember when Dad was sick? You signed papers, maybe you don't recall." "I recall everything," I snapped, "and I never gave you permission to drain my life." Claire's smile turned cold. "You should be thanking us. Without us, you'd let the money rot in that account while inflation eats it. At least we're smart enough to use it." I rose from my chair, palms flat on the table. That money was my shield, my independence, and you stripped it without asking. David's jaw tightened. "It's already done, Mom. Stop making a scene. You'll see the return soon." I gathered the statements back into my folder, my hands steady despite the fire in my chest. "No, David, what I see is my son and his wife stealing from me. And this scene? It's only just beginning." 2 mornings later, I opened my mailbox to find a bright orange envelope stamped "Final Notice." Property tax delinquent. I'd never missed a bill in my life. Heart pounding, I flipped it open. Balance due, $6,400. The account on record was no longer mine, it had been switched to David's. He hadn't paid a cent. I drove straight to City Hall, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. The clerk at the counter, a young man who couldn't have been 30, clicked through his screen. It says here your son filed as co-owner last spring. Payments are now his responsibility. Co-owner? I whispered. My voice echoed in the marble hall. Yes, ma'am. Power of attorney authorization. We have it on file. Heat crawled up my neck. I walked out before I screamed. On the steps outside, I caught the eyes of Margaret and Helen, two women from my church circle. They smiled politely but whispered the moment they thought I couldn't hear. David's finally handling her finances. About time. Poor Patricia was probably overwhelmed. Overwhelmed? I'd balanced ledgers for 40 years. I wanted to shout it, but the words stuck like stones in my throat. That evening, I called David again. He answered with a sigh, Claire's laughter audible in the background. Mom, what now? What now? I snapped. The tax office says you're listed as co-owner. You've let the bill go unpaid. Do you want me fined? Do you want me homeless? Claire's voice cut in, smug and clear onto speaker. Patricia, calm down. It's a minor oversight. We'll cover it when the next investment matures. Investment? My hands shook. You drained nearly $400,000. What did you put it in? David hesitated. A startup, Evan's cousin's firm. It's in a rough patch. A rough patch. My life savings gambled on some cousin's fantasy. You had no right, I whispered. Claire's tone sharpened. Look, the house is in both names now. Stop acting like you're the only one with skin in this game. Skin in this game. My own daughter-in-law spoke of my home and savings like poker chips. I hung up before rage made me ill, but the damage was already spreading. The next day at the market, two neighbors approached. One clapped my shoulder, smiling. Heard David stepping up at last. Must be a relief, huh? I forced a nod, but shame flushed through me. My betrayal wasn't private anymore. It was dressed up as help, whispered in checkout lines, praised in pews. And the more they believed it, the smaller I felt. Back home, I closed every curtain, sat at the dining table, and laid out the overdue notice beside the drained bank statements. Melissa Carter had been wrong in her story. I hadn't been erased yet, but Claire and David were writing me out one signature at a time. The following Sunday, I stopped by David's house. Claire opened the door before I could even knock twice, all polished smile and bright lipstick. Patricia, perfect timing, she said, ushering me into the living room. On the coffee table lay a glossy brochure. I picked it up, frowning. Lakeshore Retirement Village, where golden years shine. Pictures of manicured lawns, shuffleboard courts, and smiling seniors clutching bingo cards filled the pages. I looked up. What is this? David walked in, rubbing the back of his neck. Mom, hear us out. You'd be safer there. No worries about bills, no lonely nights in that big house. It's time. It's time. My voice cracked. Claire sat across from me, crossing her legs like a queen on a throne. We already scheduled a tour. Thursday at 10, they have excellent staff, and with the house in transition, it just makes sense. In transition? My throat tightened. David avoided my eyes. The buyers are lined up. It's basically done. I slapped the brochure shut. Without me? Claire's tone cooled. You should see this as a blessing. Most women your age don't get options like this. A blessing. To be shoved out of the home James and I built, my savings gutted, my name forged, and now handed a glossy pamphlet like a child being bribed with candy. I stood, shaking. I am not a project to be managed, I am not furniture to be moved, and I am not going to Lakeshore. David's shoulders stiffened. Mom, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're doing this for you. No, I said, my voice low, trembling but firm. You're doing it for yourselves. The silence afterward was suffocating. Claire folded her arms, lips pursed, as if she'd already won. David stared at the carpet like a scolded boy, though he was 40 years old. I walked out, clutching the brochure so tightly it wrinkled in my fist. On the drive home, I tossed it onto the passenger seat. The smiling seniors on the cover looked like cardboard cutouts, cheerfully erased of their lives before. Back in my kitchen, I sat at the table surrounded by silence. For the first time in decades, I felt small, invisible, erased before I was even gone. Monday morning, I woke with a weight pressing down on my chest. The brochure from Lakeshore still sat crumpled on the kitchen counter. I almost threw it away, but instead I shoved it into my purse. Not as surrender, evidence. I drove to Nora's house. She and I had worked together decades ago at the bank. She had retired 5 years before me, but her mind was still sharper than most men half her age. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just sat on a pot of coffee. I spread the statements across her dining table. They drained it, Nora. All of it. $380,000. Gone. She adjusted her glasses, scanning line by line. Transfers to an account under Claire's maiden name, she muttered. Classic concealment. Patricia, this isn't sloppy bookkeeping, this is deliberate. The words stung, but they also lit a fire. Can we trace it? Nora nodded. Every cent. Banks have audit trails. If Claire thought using her old name would cover her tracks, she underestimated you. By afternoon, we had highlighted every suspicious withdrawal, each circled in red. The total nearly matched the missing balance. My anger, once shapeless, now had numbers, hard proof. Nora leaned back, eyes narrowing. Next step is a lawyer. Caldwell still practicing downtown? I hadn't thought of him in years. Caldwell had handled a minor property dispute for James and me back in the 80s. Thorough, blunt, and allergic to liars. That evening, I sat across from him in his paneled office, the ledger spread open like a wound. He flipped through silently, then looked at me over his glasses. This is theft, Mrs. Monroe. Fraud, power of attorney abuse, possibly embezzlement. And given your age, the court will view it as elder exploitation. I swallowed. And what happens if I press charges? He folded his hands. Your son and daughter-in-law could face jail. At minimum, heavy restitution. But if you'd rather a quieter solution, we can freeze all accounts today. Redirect your assets into a trust under your sole control. They won't touch another penny. I stared at the brochure still crumpled in my purse. My son and his wife had planned to exile me while pocketing my future. Jail suddenly didn't sound so harsh, but more than punishment, I wanted control back. Do it, I said. My voice didn't shake. Caldwell gave a curt nod. We'll file immediately. And Patricia? He tapped the ledger with his pen. Don't underestimate the power of confronting them with the numbers. Thieves thrive on silence. Bring the receipts into the light and watch them burn. That night at home, I opened my notebook. For weeks, it had been filled with bills and notes about groceries. Now I wrote in bold strokes across a clean page, They stole my future. I will steal it back. By Wednesday, Caldwell had already filed the paperwork. My accounts were frozen to outside access, the fraudulent power of attorney nullified, and a brand new trust created in my name only. I signed every document with a steady hand, savoring the scratch of the pen across paper. When I left his office, I didn't feel like prey anymore. I felt like the hunter. At home, I packed a tote bag with the originals, bank statements, Nora's highlighted printouts, Caldwell's affidavits, proof layered upon proof. For years, my bags carried potluck casseroles, birthday gifts, or checks for David's emergencies. Now it carried something heavier, truth. That evening, I called David. Family dinner, Saturday here, no excuses. He hesitated, then said, "Fine," before hanging up. The days leading up to it felt different. I didn't cower behind curtains anymore. I opened windows wide, let the neighbors see me raking leaves, shoulders straight. Margaret from across the street waved. For once, I didn't feel shame. Soon the whispers would turn in my favor. On Friday, Claire called, her voice coated in syrup. "Patricia, we've been thinking, once the house sells, you'll thank us. It's for the family's future. Sophie needs honesty," I interrupted. "We'll talk Saturday." Then I ended the call. That night, I laid out the papers on my oak table like weapons polished before battle. Each receipt, each transfer circled in red. At the center, the total, $365,672, a number that spoke louder than any speech. I rehearsed the words quietly. Not melodrama, not shouting, just sentences sharp enough to cut. This is theft. You forged my signature. The money is safe now, beyond your reach. I imagined David's face crumbling, Claire's mask cracking. I imagined Sophie's wide eyes realizing the truth. And for the first time since James died, I smiled at the reflection in my window. Not the weak old woman they mistook me for, a woman with a plan and the evidence to back it. Saturday evening, the dining room smelled of roast chicken and garlic bread, but beneath the scent lay steel. I had set the table as always, but at the center sat not flowers or candles, only a neat stack of documents. David arrived first, shoulders hunched, phone in hand. Claire followed, perfume sharp, lips already tightened into a line. Sophie trailed behind them, quiet, clutching her backpack. "Mom," David began cautiously, "what's all this about?" I motioned for them to sit. "Dinner, of course, and the truth." Claire smirked. "The truth? Patricia, please don't be dramatic." I slid the first statement across the table. The inked withdrawals glared up. $380,000. My retirement, my independence, gone, signed away with David's name. David stiffened. "We told you, it was an investment." I pushed another sheet forward, the red circles Nora had drawn standing out like wounds. "Then explain why the money traveled straight into an account under your maiden name, Claire. Not a mutual fund, not stocks, your pocket." Sophie's head snapped toward her mother. "Is that true?" Claire's mask faltered for half a second before she forced a laugh. "Patricia, you're mistaken. Old statements can be confusing. I'm sure Nora—" The door creaked. Nora herself stepped in, coat still on, folder in hand. "Confusing?" she said calmly. "Funny, because I traced every cent. Here are the audit trails." "Patricia isn't mistaken. She's precise." Claire's face drained. David turned on her. "You said it was temporary, that we'd pay it back." Claire shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't you dare pin this on me. You signed too." I let the chaos swell, then slammed my palm on the oak. The sound cracked the room open. "Enough." Silence. I rose slowly, the stack of papers in my hands. I met with Caldwell. Every fraudulent document is void. The accounts are frozen. The money is secured in a trust. Mine alone. Try to touch it, and you'll answer to the courts. Claire's voice trembled now. "You wouldn't drag your own son into court." I leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "I would drag anyone who steals from me. Blood does not excuse betrayal." David's face collapsed. He looked at Sophie, who was staring at me with tears brimming. "Grandma," she whispered, "I didn't know, I swear." I softened, touched her hand. "Now you do. Remember who stood when others tried to erase me?" Claire shoved her chair back, standing. "This is ridiculous. We're leaving." I lifted the final page, Caldwell's affidavit stamped and signed. "Leave, but understand this. The neighborhood will know, the church will know, and the law already knows. The game is over." For the first time, David looked smaller than his age, like the boy who once clung to me during thunderstorms. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The balance had shifted. I wasn't the one on trial anymore. They were. News travels fast in Denver's older neighborhoods. By the following week, whispers had shifted. No longer pity for poor Patricia being managed by her son, but sharp murmurs about forged signatures, missing money, and a daughter-in-law who had overplayed her hand. At church, Claire walked in with her head high, but the air bent around her. People didn't smile. They stared. Margaret leaned toward me during the hymn and whispered, "Good for you, Patricia. You finally showed them." Claire pretended not to hear, but her face burned red. David trailed behind her, looking like a shadow who'd lost its owner. Sophie, however, slipped into the pew beside me. She didn't say a word, just reached for my hand. I squeezed it, and that was enough. The following Monday, Caldwell called. "The trust is finalized, your funds are safe, and unless your son wants to spend the next year in hearings, he won't challenge it, not with this evidence." I thanked him, hung up, and stood at my kitchen window. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. That evening, I boxed up what I no longer needed: old furniture, clutter that carried too much memory. I kept the essentials: my oak table, James's photograph, the quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. These would move with me to a smaller apartment downtown, one with bright windows and no ghosts of betrayal in the walls. Neighbors stopped me during the move. Some hugged me, others simply nodded with respect. Nora stood by the truck, hands on her hips, proud as if she'd fought the battle herself. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied. "We did it." The apartment wasn't grand, but when sunlight streamed across the floorboards, I felt something I hadn't in years: ownership of my life. That night, I opened my notebook, the same one filled with bills and lists, and wrote a final line. They thought they could drain me dry. Instead, I filled my cup again, and this time it's mine alone. I live quietly now, but not silently. Sophie visits often, bringing flowers or just stories from school. Sometimes we bake together, laughter echoing off the walls of my modest but free home. Claire avoids me, and David speaks little, his shame too thick to cut through. That's their burden, not mine. I reclaimed my dignity, and once reclaimed, it never leaves again. So if you've listened this far, thank you. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Stories Women 65 Plus USA, because stories like mine deserve to be heard.